Hey everybody, it's Ed. I've got two quick announcements before we start. First, I want to thank 4 brand new Patreon supporters: Gabe Fancher, Steve Rhines, Andrew Finn, and Lauren Page. These 4 folks went to mountainandprairie.com/Patreon and signed up to support the podcast either on an annual or monthly basis, depending on what you choose. And there are a bunch of different benefits that come with that, including a Patreon exclusive podcast that I put out once a month. So you can go to mountainandprairie.com/Patreon to learn all about that. And second thing is I'm going to be sending out my bi-monthly book recommendations pretty soon. For almost 9 years now, I've been sending out one email every other month with 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8 books that I read over the past 2 months and want to recommend. There are no sales pitches. There's no sneaky stuff. There's nothing. It's just books that I've sent out. I started out sending it to about 30 of my friends back in 2015. And now the thing has grown and grown and grown, and I don't even know who's on it anymore. But there are a lot of people, and they seem to enjoy it. So no strings attached, just books that I read and like. So if you want to learn more about that, you go to mountainandprairie.com/reading or follow the link in the episode notes. Thanks so much. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. If you're a longtime Mountain and Prairie listener, then you're already familiar with the Partnership of Rangeland Trusts, also known as PORT. But for any new listeners, PORT is an alliance of agriculture-focused conservation organizations dedicated to preserving working farms and ranches and conserving productive agricultural lands. PORT is currently celebrating its 20th anniversary. And in those 2 decades, and as of this recording, PORT organizations have helped more than 2,000 families conserve almost 3.2 million acres of productive working lands across the West. In this episode, I chat with 3 executive directors of PORT-affiliated organizations, 2 of which have been on the podcast before. You'll recognize Chad Ellis of the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, also known as TALT, and Erik Glenn of the Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust. And new to the podcast is Michael Delbar, who leads the California Rangeland Trust. I've known all 3 of these guys for many years now, and I've long admired the ways that they lead their respective organizations. But perhaps even more impressive to me is how they've worked as a team with all 9 PORT organizations to increase the scale, influence, and effectiveness of large-scale working lands conservation. I don't think I've ever recorded an episode this early in the morning. We squeezed it in between an early morning breakfast and PORT's board meeting. Just the day before, we'd all been at TALT's Working Lands Innovation Summit on the Birdwell-Clark Ranch in Henrietta, Texas, which was a huge success. So this was a great time to reflect on the importance of working lands, and we covered a lot, including the Working Lands Innovation Summit and the importance of spending time out on the land, the history and purpose of PORT, the growth of additive conservation projects, private lands conservation as an economic driver, hard work, innovation, the importance of advocating for conservation in Washington, D.C., future plans for PORT, and much more. As you'll hear, I start out chatting with Chad and Erik, and then Michael steps in for Erik about halfway through and shares his valuable perspective. A huge thanks to TALT for inviting me to Texas, and another huge thanks to all the PORT organizations and their landowner partners who've had such a positive and significant impact on the landscapes of the West. All right, fellas, 2 Mountain and Prairie veterans here. Both been on twice. No, lucky number 3. This is one of those moments where when I think about me being from Eastern North Carolina, and now I'm in Wichita Falls, Texas, with all these ranching people. And it's one of these moments where I'm like, how did I end up here? This is too good to be true and completely unexpected. But Chad, can you talk a bit about our awesome event yesterday and what brought us all here?
Yeah. So we TALT hosted the Working Lands Innovation Summit. And this is a summit that we put on annually. And just kind of bringing, multiple people from different facets, from ranchers to corporations to, just other folks in kind of the carbon space or other, kind of additive conservation. And really what we're doing is not just having conversation. It's really about action. So we have these conversations, panel discussions, brought you in to kind of help moderate or, have fun and keep everybody in check, which you're good at, right? And
you tell me.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just a great way to come together, bring action and move forward and think of these innovations and really hear from the landowners, those land stewards of, what's the challenges they have, not just the challenge by, today, but what they're thinking and staying up at night and, us coming together to find those solutions.
The thing I really admire about what you're doing, Erik and Michael over there in the corner, who we're going to hear from in a minute, what all y'all do on all these port land trust is it's not an echo chamber. Like I feel like sometimes in the conservation world, it can just be all people from the same kind of niche in this conservation world. And it is this echo chamber. And there's a lot of good can come from that, but there can also there's not a reality check. And so this event yesterday, we had a guy from New York City from JP Morgan, one of the top guys. And we had somebody from ConocoPhillips. And then we had a bunch of folks from the carbon world. And I don't know, I just feel like bringing in, it's like the opposite of inbreeding, like you're bringing in new ideas that keep things fresh. And what I love about both of you guys is this focus on action and not talk. We were just having breakfast just a minute ago and complaining about some of these conferences where it's just blah, 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 talk and no action. And both of y'all are the definition of action. So it was fun.
I'm getting old. I don't have the patience.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I always say, there's only so many growing seasons that you have, right?
Sure.
And, I don't have too many more growing seasons. So it's just like, you got to get on it.
Get it done.
Yeah.
We just wrapped it up. I'm sure you're in some ways breathing a sigh of relief, but is this every other year thing generally?
It's every other year, kind of depends on,
Sure.
bandwidth. I think the important part, right, is the location of where we have this event. It's on a ranch, right? And that's the key point is when, we do it outside under a tent and when we're having the conversations and we see the landscape. I mean, that's why we're here. That's why, that's what we're looking at. We're not in a conference room or, indoors.
Yeah.
And, with that, we had to deal with a little heat and a little wind yesterday. And, that's good for, some folks from New York City to taste a little dust. And
I agree.
It's all good.
Well, congrats on an awesome event, and I appreciate you including me.
Thank you for coming.
Nah, I love it. I mean, seriously, I say this, but I think the word honored is overused now. Everybody, especially on that silly LinkedIn, everybody's like, I'm honored. But I really am honored to be included in anything y'all are doing. And so speaking of what y'all are doing, y'all never rest. You never call me. We were eating breakfast. We stayed up late last night and then we're down here eating breakfast 6:30 or whatever. And now you're heading into a meeting for the partnership of Rangeland Trust. And both of y'all have been on the podcast and we've mentioned it briefly. But I think it's very, very important for the listeners to understand what y'all are doing because there's a lot of power behind what y'all are doing. And just in the time I've been following it, the organization has really just become, I don't know if this is the right word, but more powerful. And so Erik, could you just kind of give folks an overview of what PORT is?
Sure. And it's a real honor to be in Texas and to have been a part of Chad's Working Lands Innovation Summit. This is the first time that we've taken the partnership of Rangeland Trust. Typically, we meet once a year in Denver, and we decided to do a second meeting in person this year in conjunction with Chad's event.
Yeah.
Which was exciting to be on a ranch, see what they're doing at Texas Ag Land Trust in terms of conservation. But, I've always said that partnership of Rangeland Trust is what really makes the work of Colorado Cattlemen's Ag Land Trust, Texas Ag Land Trust, California Rangeland Trust, its members work really well and work even better than these other conservation organizations across the country is this collaboration that we have with each other. There's 9 members in the partnership. We operate in 12 Western, Midwestern states. This is the 20th anniversary of the partnership.
That's crazy.
Which is exciting. Collectively, our memberships conserve more than 3 million acres of land. And I should correct that. What I should say is our landowner partners have conserved more than 3 million acres of working landscapes across these 12 states. And we help them facilitate that. The members of Port help them facilitate that. And Port really is this collaboration of these organizations that come together to talk about how we're doing this work. How can we do it better? And then to advocate for public policy initiatives that can make this work better and work at a much bigger scale. And it's all with this intent of how do we make conservation work better for those private landowners. It goes back to that Aldo Leopold quote about, the true conservation is going to happen by the private landowner doing the conservation work to benefit the rest of the public.
Sure.
And it's not the specific, the exact quote, but that's the gist of it, right? We all have to recognize that it's the private landowners that are doing this work that allows these open places that we all, as the public, get to enjoy as we drive these scenic byways. They're the ones doing the work to keep wildlife, to have habitat, particularly in the winter months, intact. They're the ones putting food on our table. Chad, Michael, and I get the honor of working with these landowners to help them conserve these lands so they can continue to go out and do that great work. And that, that's exciting work. It's meaningful work. It's work that has an impact. It's work that I feel really privileged to be a part of and to collaborate with really, really special, unique, and exciting folks to do that.
I don't know how much either you know about it, but I'd love to hear about the early days of when Port started and how it started, whose idea it was, because it's crazy to think 20 years, and also crazy to think, like, Erik, when you and I really started hanging out, it was right around the time Cattleman's was turning 20, and now we're coming up on 30, right? Time flies. We both have white hair now. We were such youngsters, no kids. Remember that time we went out to eat? We went out, we were like, let's go get sushi. And then like 3 weeks later, we were like, we better not get sushi. And it turns out we were both being secret, but both of our wives were pregnant.
When the change, go to Mexican, right?
Yeah, we did. Who came up with the idea 20 years ago, if you know?
Well, it was a collaboration between Wyoming Stock Growers executive director at the time and the Colorado Cattlemen's Ag Land Trust director, who at that time was Lynn Sherrod. There was Lynn, then Chris West, and then me. But Lynn and this guy, Glenn Polly from Wyoming Stock Growers, kind of had this idea, and they said, we need to get these groups who kind of think alike and have this similar founding story together to talk about how we can do this work better. And they started having just kind of informal meetings. And then they said, well, we need an organization to kind of support this work. And they stood it up, and it had sort of a weird structure for a long, long time where it was officed in Wyoming, but Colorado ended up doing all the kind of administrative tasks. And,
yeah.
It's about 8 years ago, we kind of consolidated everything. And so Colorado Cattlemen's, we sort of handle all the administrative work for the partnership. And then annually we'll gather in person in Denver. All 9 members and a number of other partners will come together and talk about what we're seeing in the landscape. How can we do this work better? How can we better service these landowners and their conservation needs? And what are the public policy challenges that we have? And how can we go out and make those challenges go away effectively? How can we break down these policy barriers to help put more conservation on the ground to ensure that we have these working lands into the future? Because working landowners, they need, partners. They need help, and they need support to face the challenges that they're facing. And we just have the opportunity to provide a little bit of that support, and we can do that through public policy, and we can do that through our conservation transactional work. And then now, we're all looking at what can we do in addition to that. What can we build upon these already conserved lands? How can we help these landowners do even more? That's a lot of what Chad's Working Lands Innovation Summit was about, is like layering conservation on top of conserved landscapes.
For people who may not have thought this through, and I remember, I think, Erik, I heard it from you the first time, and I'd never thought it through, but generally land trusts have put easements on properties. And every time there's an easement put on, there's a little bit more expense to the land trust, because they're going to be stewarding that easement and enforcing the terms of that easement forever. But at some point, in a lot of ways, people will argue now a lot of the low-hanging fruit is gone for easements. And so would one of y'all talk a bit about this idea of additive conservation? So easements have been the tool for 30, 40 years at this point, but that's not going to be the tool forever. And so can you talk about what y'all are doing in what you call the additive conservation the additive conservation world?
Sure, and I'll let Chad chime in on this too, because he's really been my inspiration for a lot of this work. It's helping me think through this differently. But, I think what makes Port really special is we're constantly thinking about how do we make this all work better. One of the big, I think, issues people have with conservation easements are that they're perpetual, but it's a one-time kind of incentive for a landowner. We know these landowners are going to face challenges in the future because there's just so much coming at them in terms of drought and all the things associated with that, water shortages. How do we do production agriculture in the future? It's changing. There's a lot of conflicts that they have to address. And so easements are a great tool for that one generation. But what do we do to help support those future generations and overcome one of the things that people challenge conservation on? Is it's this one-time thing, and then you're kind of locked into it, and there's nothing else left for you at some point in the future. And so Chad and I and Michael started thinking about, well, what else can we do? And if we can find other ways to be a service to our landowner partners, help them accomplish what they're trying to accomplish on the landscape, make the landscape work better, make their operations work better, then we're providing additive services to them. It's a much more dynamic relationship, and the natural resources are going to benefit, the communities are going to benefit, and the landowners are going to benefit. And I think we can break down some of the main objections to conservation easements that folks have by offering these additional services. Just a quick story. When we started this at Colorado Cattlemen's, we went out and surveyed our landowner partners, and 88% of them said we have other conservation projects that will help improve our ag operations that we've already identified. And our limitations are capacity, funding, and knowledge of being able to interact with all these different programs. Well, those are all things we do as an organization already. And we said, well, why don't we step into that, help them deliver upon that? And so we're setting up a fund to help support those landowner projects.
Like, could you give an example
voluntary
of what one of those would be? Like for people people who may not have any idea what a conservation project would be.
Yeah, and it could be a lot of different things, but one of the main things we're trying to address right now in Colorado is around water infrastructure. All of a lot of landowners have infrastructure related to moving water that is sort of fallen in disrepair, or it needs some improvements to it. Those repairs can often be pretty expensive, and so we're going to step in, try to help them defray some of those costs, make that infrastructure better and work better for their operations, maybe add infrastructure to make the movement of water work better. But water is a big one for us. Then habitat enhancement projects. A lot of landowners have projects that they want to do that'll enhance habitat, but it also enhances that landscape for their livestock production too. So there's just a myriad of different projects that you can work on. I sort of think the sky's the limit there, but and so we kind of have to be a little bit more specific right now as we grow this program out. And the big ones we're working on are water, habitat enhancement, and grassland restoration. So taking and improving those grassland pasture systems.
Nice. Chad, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. I think, Ed, on that is, I think when we think about this additive conservation and this aspect, right, it's a lot of innovation, and sometimes you kind of feel like you're on this island alone trying to think through it. And that, to me, is the beauty of Port, right? It's like-minded, it's like, Erik and I talk all the time, and Erik as well is an inspiration to me of thinking through this and realize, well, maybe I'm not as crazy, right? And,
Yeah.
Erik's crazier, and, I feel good. You'll feel a little better that day. But, it's that aspect. And I think it's two-part for us is how I look at it. One, it's helping, those easement donors that we have, right? And to me, it's beyond a partnership. I look at it as a family, right? The TALT family, and that's how we handle it. Trying to find more ways to help them, right? And the other piece is we got to meet people where they are, and we're in the relationship business, right? And that's key. And sometimes an easement, it's about the timing and using that tool. And, by that, it's gaining trust and things of that nature. So if we can help the other side, kind of the other side of the road of helping them put, other additive conservation, other things of that nature, then when the timing's right, we can already have that key relationship and add that easement with them. So we kind of look at it at kind of both ends, on that side.
Chad, if you could talk a bit about your thoughts on the need to compensate landowners for conservation, because I think sometimes people, at least I just go by my own experience, but when I came out west and got interested in conservation, my first thought, just uneducated, for just soaking in pop culture or whatever, was that it's just this goodness of your heart kind of thing, and people want it to happen, and you want to make things like national parks. And hanging around with guys like you, I've learned that it's not that at all. I mean, that could be one small part of a big picture, but the families that y'all work with for many, many years, they're in a tough business, and they are the ultimate land stewards. They care about land more than anybody because their family is dependent on it for so long. But there are financial realities. This is not some billionaire who wants a tax write-off. This is, there are very hardcore financial realities that never let up. And so can you talk about your thoughts on providing compensation for conservation?
Yeah. I think it kind of starts with, Erik's Leopold quote, right? That he kind of talked about or kind of butchered, but, really, where he said, Leopold said, conservation ultimately boils down by rewarding those private land stewards that are protecting those public interests, right? And so it's that private land stewardship, public interest and benefits. And you've heard me say this is, for someone like myself, it's conservation without compensation is only a conversation.
Yep.
Right. And so it's always about that action. How do we think about that? Right. When we think about their businesses, right, the margins are really thin, and, we have to be able to unlock, I think these ecosystem services, right? You think about what the blood, sweat, and tears that they're doing on a daily basis for generations on the land. They're providing us, clean water, clean air, all these other things that, frankly, they have never gotten paid for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And point to someone else that is providing all these other services for the benefit of all of us that's not getting paid. Right. Or some kind of compensation. So I think, and this innovation summit is really kind of talking about this. We're seeing more and more pressures from corporations, right, from their stock holders and looking at sustainability goals and things of that nature. And I think we're in a good place I think a good place for Port to sort of be this bridge to help these corporations. We have these connections to these land stewards, and how can we kind of bridge this and build a system of compensation of, beyond just food products of beef or grain or things of that nature.
No, that's been one of my biggest kind of a very slow aha moment, but is just appreciating the role that the private landowners, and in Texas, I think it's harder to really get your head around just because of the landscape, and it's all private land. But like in Colorado where we are, it's very clear, like I think about the upper Arkansas Valley, and you got the big mountains on both sides that are public, and then down that beautiful valley, that's all private land, and all the water, all the elk habitat, the deer habitat. And I remember it was years ago when me and you first started hanging out, somebody at CSU did a study talking about the dollar amount that private lands conservation kind of pumps into the economy of Colorado, and I can't remember the numbers, but it's very significant.
Well, you can we did an update to that study in 2023 last year, Ed, that every dollar that the state of Colorado forgoes in tax collections as a part of the incentive program around conservation easements, the state receives somewhere between $31 and $49 in return. And that's not just one time, that's on an annual basis. Because if you think about these lands, when we keep them open to function the way the nature intended them to function, those functions are continuing to deliver those services, not on a one-time basis. They're doing it all the time. And so that return, even at $31, or even if you said it is at the high end at $49, I still think is conservative, because that's in today's numbers. This thing's going to continue when landowners commit to putting these into a conservation easement. They're committing to keep that land open and functioning the way nature intended it to function, to benefit all of us forever. And we should really be celebrating these landowners for what they're committed to doing.
Absolutely.
It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely. But I think, that's the other thing, is we need to tell the reverse of that story, right? And that's the other, to me, this benefit of Port and the policy and visiting with policymakers, right? There's that aspect of the return on investment, right? What does that mean to us? But there's also the other flip side of looking at, well, how much is that land fragmentation? How much is that conservation value? How much are we losing in a year, right? So like in Texas, we've done some of that work with Dr. Lopez, and we're losing $280 million a year in Texas by just the land fragmentation. But that number, to your point, Erik, is 1 year. Well, it's gone forever, right? And and so there's these other things of how do we get some policymakers to understand we need to invest. One is the investment of the return on investment is as good as it can be. The other side is this, how do we move, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so.
For people listening, we had a little switch up here because Erik had to run, and now we got Michael Delbar. Do you remember when we first met?
You didn't tell me there was a test this morning.
We met. I remember because you were so nice to me. I had no understanding of what was going on, but I was like two or 3 weeks into my job at Palmer Land Conservancy, where I was the conservation director, and they sent me to an NRCS meeting in Austin, Texas, where it was all the Ag Land Trust and NRCS.
Right.
And we were at some hotel in Austin, like down in the basement. And I was so confused. I didn't even really know what NRCS stood for. And then I was in there listening to all this stuff. But I remember I met you, and it was before you had taken over at the Land Trust. I believe
I was still COO at
the time. Exactly. And so anyway, you were very welcoming to my dumbass.
That's because I was in Austin. I was confused.
Can you talk a bit about your organization and kind of how you ended up where you are doing that? Because I'm a big fan of everything y'all do.
Well, thank you. We were founded by the California Cattlemen's Association 26 years ago.
Okay.
And we followed the Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust by 2 years.
Yeah.
And we were formed on the same principle that there were no organizations in existence at the time that understood conservation easements, that understood the ranching business. And as we've talked about, as you talked about already, is if you're going to get into a perpetual contract, it ought to be with an organization that understands what you do, why you do it, and how you do it. So cattlemen's thought, well, we'll start our own land trust and see what happens. And so fast forward 26 years, the California Rangeland Trust is the largest statewide land trust in California. We're just a hair under 400,000 acres right now that are permanently protected. We have in the queue another 250,000 acres, give or take.
Oh, do you really?
So we've worked with 94 ranching families to conserve that 400,000 acres. I've got another 90 plus ranching families that want to do this. And that's a great problem to have because the demand is there. They're on that waiting list because we're looking for the funding.
Okay.
But it's a great problem when you have over 90 ranching families wanting to permanently protect their private working lands.
And how has that progressed for y'all? Because I know in Colorado, at least, there was a long time where ag families were suspicious of conservation easements, and just they didn't understand, or it just wasn't a fit. And now it's gotten to the point, thanks to the work of Erik and the Nature Conservancy and all those folks in Colorado, to where it's fully accepted. Has that been a similar story in California?
It has. I remember we had, right after I first started 14 years ago, there was a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had a proposal to get funding from D.C. into California to do conservation easements. But that funding was coming from the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which requires government to hold those easements. And as part of the government process, they had to do scoping meetings. And they walked into these scoping meetings in different counties in the state with maps and circles. Talk about going backwards in your progress. That's the good way to do it. And they kind of went, uh-oh, that was not good. So it actually set kind of the progress back a bit. And it took a couple of years, frankly, to recover from that. But we have, and folks that were more suspicious have seen the success over the 26 years in California of what we've been able to do, and recognizing that our board, just like Chad's board and Erik's board, they're all the ranchers. They're farmers and ranchers. They're in the business, and that gives that trust factor to the community and the ranching community. They say, okay, I know that I'm doing business. I'm in a partnership with an organization of my brothers and sisters in the industry. That's huge, and that's what makes our organizations unique. Is that other land trusts may not have that, and their board makeups change in terms of the backgrounds and the experience of their board members, and they can kind of lose that firsthand knowledge of the private working lands.
I think that's the thing that's clear. I do a lot of conservation focused podcasts, and it's the relationship. The people that are actually getting stuff done and not just talking or having meetings all day or whatever, the ones that are getting stuff done at scale, they've been busting their ass for many, many years to building solid relationships. And the other thing that I think about with y'all all the time is that, you think about how, you've got solid relationships, but one misstep, like somebody coming in from the government with a map like that, and everything can.
Well, it takes one shit to wipe out all those attaboys.
No, it really does.
And that's key. And you look across the board of Port, right? And all of our members, and you look at the staff of Port, we all, live and breathe this, right? The passionate people, that work and are on the, and that's the other thing is I put the Port members and our staffs and organizations against anybody and other industries too. And we're going to outwork anybody. And I think comes back to like Michael's saying is we're, have this coming from the same background as well. Right. And we talked about it earlier, Ed, of those thin margins you're used to working, and that's how you're going to make it through.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just,
I think when I think about all of y'all's organizations, the first, if I had to just summarize very quickly, I think the work ethic is the number one thing that I see across the board, just this willingness to work harder than people. And then right behind that is the ability and the willingness to innovate and think outside the box. And I feel like no matter what business you're in, like that's a damn good combo, you know?
I'm going to attribute that selfishly, frankly, to the fact that we all come from agriculture.
Sure.
And that's the ethic of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
We get up in the morning and we produced a documentary, and one of our landowner partners in there says, sometimes fighting isn't pounding the table. It's getting up the next day, putting your boots on and going back to work.
Wow. Yeah.
And, that's a pretty powerful quote, in my eyes, because it says, look, we have these insurmountable challenges that we need to make surmountable. We need to be able to conquer those. And we're used to that as agriculturalists as Erik said, there's droughts and there's labor issues, there's water issues. You're fighting all these factors of which we have no control, the markets, the pricing. Yet our landowner partners persevere. And the staffs, we understand that. We come from that. Our family ranches, and we face that at home. So we understand what they're going through, and they recognize that. And that's another reason why the port member organizations have been successful. It's because we've built that trust with the landowner partners, because we, not only the board members, but their staff are their brothers and sisters in the industry.
Yeah. And I think we take it to the other level on that relationship. I sit there and think of those times, like our staff, and without me saying anything, right? They're all in. We have these waves where we had these kind of deadlines to put in for, applications for that funding. And, we have the demand, the same as Michael in Texas. We have 90 in our pipeline, and our guys will work knowing that 2-month kind of window, work 7 days a week, 70 to 100 hours for that period, taking away from their family, right, at home. But they know that sacrifice. And again, they look at it as of this huge, TALT family, right? And I kind of look at that extended family of port, and, I know TALT, we're not any different than, Michael and Erik and others.
Well, and I would imagine that's another thing that port does, is it just reinforces that, because if somebody came in here and all of a sudden they weren't working hard, I would imagine it keeps everybody, if anybody ever starts feeling a little lazy, you think about this crew and everybody else that's working so hard, and it.
Yeah, but it energizes, I think, too, right?
Oh, yeah.
When you work with a lot of other people that work and you see that,
it's contagious.
It's contagious. And, I never really realized that. I used to work for USDA and RCS, and, I've had this work ethic. It's just part of me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just did it and grind. And, I don't think I ever worked a 40-hour week, or, it was always more than that. It was just how it is. And I remember, like, when I left the agency and started working somewhere else, and it was like, oh wow, I didn't realize how that really weighted on me. And then the energy I had of, all these other people with that same work ethic. Yeah.
I'd add one thing is our staffs that are working on these projects get so tied up in them. They get so enamored with and attached to our landowner partners. When we close a project, I don't care on our staff if you're the finance guy or the administrative assistant answering the phone to the transaction person. Everybody just gets emotional and excited because they've see the interest and the passion in our landowners, and they share that. And I don't see that in other areas I've been. As Chad said, you go to work, you get your job done, you go home. Our staffs are just tied to this emotionally.
Sure. It's super inspiring, and I talk to a lot of folks all over the place, and they're really, what you guys have going is very, very, very unique. And I feel like I get energy from it. I'm not even like in the I just talking to y'all, hanging out, and it gives me energy. Like this morning when I got that text about going to breakfast early, I was like, well, these guys already been up like 2 hours. I don't want them to think I'm lazy. I gotta go. One thing I've seen both of y'all, I believe, when I was at Palmer, we went to DC. It might have been before your time. I'm not sure.
It was probably before my time.
But I saw you there for the LTA, Land Trust Alliance advocacy days where you go and you talk with all the elected officials. And I always, when I was going to that, they told me to go, I was thinking, man, this is going to be a waste of time. These people, they don't care. They don't, whatever I'm going to say, they're not going to listen. And I often say that it was one of the more formative work things I've ever been to, because you walk into these offices, literally senators, U.S. senators, and they sit there and they listen and they are interested, and change happened because of those meetings. From that, I mean, it took a while, but it took maybe 4 years. But because of the issues we were discussing with these senators, there was legislation put in place. And it was so inspiring to me. And so I'm curious if y'all could talk a bit about how Port uses that, and from a policy standpoint of going to D.C. and trying to make things happen. Because I really think people need to understand that it is a lever that you can pull that creates change.
Absolutely. And when Port meets and goes to DC, and we walk the halls of Congress and we're in cowboy hats and boots, we get attention. And everybody's going to look. They're going to, what are these guys doing here? But when we go into a member's office and sit down with them, and we have our landowner partners with us, and they're telling the stories about the conservation work that they're doing on their land. And it's on both sides of the aisle. We have the Democrats, we have Republicans, and we meet with Democrats and Republicans. And there's no partisanship to land conservation. And that's what breaks down those walls and those barriers. And the members see it and they go, this is great. This is great environmental work. This is great private property rights work. This is a win for everybody, regardless of what color, tie you're wearing.
Sure.
But the clout and the respect that I think Port has made back there, because we're back there 2 or 3 times a year, that, like I said, it garners attention when you walk down those halls, and they want to meet with us. And we get meetings with the members and their staff, but more member meetings than probably other folks can do, because they respect the work that we're doing and the work that our landowner partners are doing.
That's what struck me is, when I was there were 2 senators in Colorado on opposite ends of the spectrum politically, and they were both so excited to see us and asking very engaged questions. I've got a real pessimistic BS meter, and I'm always like sizing people up, like, is this bullshit? And I didn't get any of that. Maybe they're really good, but I didn't get any of that.
Yeah, and I think that's with Port, right, is like-minded. And it's about scale, right? When we walk in there, if Michael and Erik and I walk in there from California, Colorado, Texas, into a senator's office, it just has more weight and power. And we can all kind of tell those different stories. We can talk about how, this is what's happening in your district, but it's broader, right? And how this policy changes. And, we think at Port, I think we're 3.5 million acres under conservation easement as a group, some right around there. I mean, that's significant, yeah, right? And they listen. And, that's what's so great. And I think it's about meetings like we're about to have today. It's us thinking through what are the policy changes we need, and us strategizing of, okay, who has what relationships, and let's, start having those conversations.
All right. So you got 20 years of amazing work. And I would imagine it's a lot like building the relationships for the conservation easements, where it's building, and then it's just kind of this exponential growth. So you're hitting 20 years. What's next for Port? I mean, when next could be, what are you talking about today at the meeting? Or it could be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I mean, is it ever, will there ever be just like a Port organization with full-time staff? I mean, you don't have to give me all the details, but I'm just curious what you guys are looking, what the vision is going forward.
Yeah. So for me, right, I think, we've been having these conversations the last few years is, I think for us to really take that next step is we need full-time staff, right? Yeah. We need someone waking up each and every day thinking about Port and Port members and how to take us to the next level, right? Not just from an organization, but it's those land stewards, and how do we, impact that? So that, I think that's the key. I see where, we're 9 organizations now, 12 states, and I see that growing.
Okay.
You know, we have some of those things. And I think that's the beauty, right? Of, it wasn't just a few years ago where Port members and Erik and other executive directors went to South Dakota and helped them get their organization, right? And I see more of that, going to be in the near future. So I think there's just great things coming.
No, I agree with Chad. We have organizations that are wanting to be part of Port.
Yeah.
And they see the success that Port's had over the last 20 years, and they want to be a part of that. And so we're having those discussions. But as Chad said, we've been spreading that work along. Erik's done a lot of it, frankly. And in Colorado Cattlemen's has been great in supporting him for that. But we're on the precipice of doing so much more.
Yeah.
And we're at that point where we do need that staffer that can wrangle us, keep the meetings going, keep those conversations going. And like I said, we spread it around amongst the 9 EDs now, but we're at that point.
Yeah. It's amazing to think how much y'all have gotten done without that, because you're like we talked about, y'all go hard, just in your own organizations, and the ability to devote so much time, even just to travel to come to meetings like this. That it's amazing that you've been able to do what you've done.
Yeah. To me, it's absolutely amazing, and I think again comes a lot to Erik, and we can talk nice about him since he's not in the room now, but, and Erik has said it, right? He gave, and then, kids and then it's this other juggle, right, of life. And he like, hey, I haven't given as much, and he feels down. And, Michael and Kendall and I are like, man, you've done, way above and beyond. And that's what to me is so exciting. How much have we done of us sharing the work and not really having someone focused, and not be just another item down the list. I think we'll be shocked. I really think, I think I don't think we can really, I can't grasp where we will be once we get to that point, and that, full-time person. I think we're just, sky's the limit.
I agree. What did I miss? Any parts about Port that I missed? I feel like that was such a good overview, and you guys have your meeting coming up where you actually do the work. And so I don't want to get in the way. We're talking about how much we don't like talking.
Well, I think and maybe this is wishful thinking, but what we really do need is the reason why we haven't done that, taken that next step on the staff. It's funding.
Yes.
It's really what it comes down to. Our organizations independently support Port, but to have a staff and that support, it takes funding, and we're already working on shoestring budgets. But if it resonates with somebody that can support that gets us there.
Well, I know funders listen to this.
Well, yeah. And I think, right, is it's, really when we think about it from an investment and seed.
Oh,
the return on investment with Port to get us to that. It's going to be the best ROI of any, funding.
Well, I'm excited to see where it all continues to go. And regardless, take conservation out of the deal, but just getting to know all you guys, like, it's enriched my life significantly. I don't want to get your heads too big, but seriously, like, just hanging out with y'all, I'm in a completely different world. I'm fans of what y'all do now, but different business, but I get a lot of motivation, and, y'all set an example for me in just how you go about doing things with purpose and with energy, and, working your ass off. And so, I'm a super fan. So thank you for all y'all do. And thanks for taking the time to do this during such a busy time. And thanks for having me in Texas.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Thanks. And, you and I have been talking about Erik and I coming together and doing this tag team, and at least one of us did okay.
Yeah.
Luckily, we had to bring Delbar.
Yeah, we had to bring in Michael.
Closer.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, There are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. But thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.